Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
Truck drivers, what's a creepy story you've got from the middle of nowhere? Episode 10, last. Another story, this one wasn't really out of nowhere, but it was at a truck stop in a rural area. Only lights were on the truck stop and the rest of the field was pitched black for truckers to park and sleep. There weren't many trucks, there were like 4. I parked in the pitch black, but there was a single light pole connected to wooden fence and illuminating a dirt road not far from my front windshield, like 50 feet away or so. I was chilling in the back of my semi-truck behind the curtains. I laid down body facing the windshield with the curtains opened while on my phone. When I stood up on my knees and looked out my windshield, I kid you not, there was a figure jumping and trying to peek into the truck, but that person couldn't jump high enough, only saw above forehead when it tried jumping. It was so creepy with the single light pole in the background. When I got out to check, it was a kid trying to see what was going on, since I had lights shining at the back of the truck and he had never been in a semi-truck with a room at the back. It's like having a farm with your room's window facing an empty foggy field with a single light pole illuminating a road far out in the distance and having a ghost figure attempting to see you by jumping where you only see part of their head when they're jumping. Former trucker. Now this was kind of creepy, in my head, middle of pretty much nowhere. I decided to turn around, forgot why, but I have to go onto the sandy/dirty gravelly kind of field. I got kind of stuck. Out of nowhere this woman drives up. Dirty face. Literally dirt on her face. Had this smile. A smile like, it's going to be fine. So, I'm freaking out telling her, OMG, I can't believe this, what do I do? She smiles and tells me to turn on the 4-wheel axle button thing. I'm not, nor was I ever an expert truck driver. It works, it gets me out. She still has the smile on her face. A woman with a dirty face and kind of dirty clothes drives away. She had 3 kids in her car waving me goodbye. I start to drive, and I see on the ground someone spelled out the word God with sticks and stones. I thought she was God. I thought it made sense. It's a woman. She's helping me. Came out nowhere just in my time of need. LOL. Not a trucker, but a few years back my wife and her sister were driving back from an evening meal. I was driving back along some country roads, in the UK for reference. All of a sudden we drove along this road with lots of really tall trees along the side of the road. We sudden all got the same feeling of, if we see someone standing in the road, just keep driving. To set the scene, it was the kind of place you'd expect to see someone hanging from a tree. Me and my girlfriend were walking home, 16 and 17, and we always do this. We live in the really good due to her grandparents, and there's virtually no drama there. But this one night, a car pulled up on the left side of the boulevard. We were walking in the middle, and it just sat there and stared. We noticed this and took note of it, but I just said we were okay. We were in a nice part of town and will scream if needed. It drives off and we think nothing of it, but about 15 seconds later a different car comes from the same direction on the right side of the boulevard and is going terribly slow. When driving next to us, they stop completely, wait a couple seconds, honk twice and speed like I've never seen. Scared out of both of us. Sorry, not a truck driver, but my sister said when she was driving along the East Coast at night that some guy came up to her outside a gas station and asked for help with his car. Gestured to a white van parked on the other side of the lot. She said she was sorry and had to go and got in her car quickly and drove away. She didn't call the police officers or even the gas station, which I really don't understand at all. I don't care if it seems excessive, very possibly and in my opinion likely that guy was a creep, to put it lightly. No innocent intentioned man would ask a female college student driving a sedan for help with a big van when there were other people around. Not me, but my dad drives a truck and has since they taught him in Army in the 70s. He drove locally and was home every night because he was raising a family, until 2008 when the economy crashed, so nothing eventful for him before that. Thankfully, we were all adults, but then, so he wasn't leaving small kids behind. Going over the road he experienced quite a lot of lot lizards, getting to the point where he wouldn't park at truck stops because they'd knock on his door at all hours and wake him up at a few of the stops. The worst situation was driving through an area with several dairy farms. A cow had escaped and ran in front of his, at the time, brand new truck on a 2-lane road. The cow got up and walked away, I'm sure with several internal injuries, but his truck was totaled. The cow went through the front grille, doing a bunch of damage around the engine and completely removed the front driver's side fender. That was quite a few years ago, and he still doesn't like that cow. He's back to doing local routes, so at least there's less risk now. Not a truck driver, but my dad and I would always go offshore fishing with his friend in Georgetown, South Carolina. We'd leave our house in Columbia around midnight to get there 2.5 hours later, all from the back roads. I'll never forget being in 4th grade seeing what looked like a house on fire out in the cornfields until we passed it. 2 15-feet crosses on fire and white robes all around it. Couple guys on horses in those get-ups too. I didn't really get what I was seeing, but it just looked so evil. I think my dad hit 90 in that Acura Legend of ours right there. I had been driving for longer than I should have before a lot of the driver fatigue laws were enforced heavily. Was coming out of the Central Desert in Western Australia. I remember hitting a bat square in the windscreen. The bat stayed there for a second, its body fell downwards, but a small light the size and shape of the bat stayed on the windscreen for a second and then shot upwards. I decided it was time to pull over and sleep. I told my dad, who was an old truck, and he said it was most likely the soul of the animal I saw. It's not that creepy really, but that ghost bat image has stayed with me for the last 15 years. Me and my friends were driving at night for a 5-6 hour drive. We were 4 of us, I was driving, I was going 200 kilometers per hour. We passed a car, and I didn't notice something just driving, and my friend who was sitting next to me said, "Can you please slow down and let the car in front pass us?" When I said no, why? He got angry and told me to just do it. So, I did, and when they passed, my friends could see a woman in back seat flat just lifting her head, with her mouth taped. We quickie call the police and just follow them. After 30 minutes, the police set up a bracket. There was a woman in back seat hand taped, mouth taped, and at the trunk there was a saw, trash bag, knives. The police told us he was probably going to kill her. Okay, so, my stepfather, it's a truck driver, and one time 4 men caught him when he was doing a break, put a gun on his head and lead him into literally the middle of nowhere. After 2 days being held hostage by the thieves, my dad was left on the road. He was so happy to be alive that he didn't even realize that he had lost the truck with everything he had. Clothes, cell phone, TV, a lot of things. And the product he was transporting too. So, life went on, and a week later the truck was found in a city extremely far from the original incident. Everything was intact. The product, all his things, even expensive things like a special tablet for trunk he had. Only his shoes were missing. Not a truck driver, but I worked for the Department of Fish and Wildlife at a summer camp and went home with some coworkers on the weekend to Huntington, West Virginia. We stopped by a liquor store, and I decided to stay in the car. I was about 19 at the time and have always had a really good awareness of my surroundings, and no matter where I was I always locked my car when I'm sitting in park, no matter where I am or how long I'm there. I am just looking around and there's not many cars in the parking lot, maybe 3 or 4, and nobody walking that I can see. I looked out at my phone to text my mom and let her know I made it to WVOK when out of nowhere a man starts pulling on my driver's door handle so hard my whole Jeep shakes. Knowing the doors are locked, I just looked up at him, didn't have tinted windows. He just stops pulling and smiles at me and motions for me to roll down my window. Hell, no is basically the look I gave him, and just shook my head. Then he starts reaching into his pocket and pulls out a bracelet and presses it against the window and again motions for me to roll down the window. About that time my friends came out of the store and screamed at the guy and came towards him, and he dropped the bracelet and sprinted away. I have no idea his exact intentions, but it wasn't good. It made me so thankful that I made it a habit to keep my doors locked. I wasn't a truck driver or even a driver. I live in the south of England. Last month was my birthday. I went out to Brighton to see family and friends. I thought I was going to be late for the last bus home, so I walked to the bus stop. Which turned out to be a huge mistake. I should have got the train. I live in a town called Eastbourne, and to get home on the bus, I had to go through the Seven Sisters, which is a country park, north of which has vast amounts of forests. So, I managed to get the last bus. The bus was driving along the A259. I was the only person on the top deck when I turned my head to look into the trees. I saw a humanoid-like creature swinging through the treetops. Bear in mind the bus is doing 40 to 50 miles per hour, this creature was keeping up. I wish I could say I made eye contact with it, but from what I saw, it didn't have eyes. It must have known I was looking at it because it dropped from the trees. I didn't see it again after that. But I'm never ever going to go to that country park again. Late but just saw this, I was an OTR driver trainee near the end of my training. My trainer and I were on a long dark stretch of Y93 in AZ. He was taking the dipshit detail known as the overnight/deep dark so he could think. He and his wife were having issues, so I gave him the space. If you ever tried to sleep in an old Freightliner as it rolls merrily along, you don't know torture. You do learn to sleep through it, but there remains I am actually sleeping moments where you know the truck isn't moving or running. Well, I woke up that night and it was too quiet. No lights. Not dash lights, my alarm clock, radios, nothing. I even grabbed my watch, and it was dead. So, I roll up in the dark, and get dressed. I pulled the curtains open, and the truck was dead quiet. My trainer wasn't in it, and everything was dark, but a nice near full moon on a beautiful clear AZ night. I got out of the truck to look for my trainer and he is standing back about 50 feet from the front of the truck, just staring into space. His clothes, his jewelry, he was a stereotypical Guido from CT with the gold bling and all, his shoes and all were in a pile about 5 feet in front of the truck. I walked up to him and asked WTF. It took him a good 2 minutes to come around and he had no idea what happened. He grabbed his clothes and got dressed, thank God, and we looked at the truck. Every single battery in that truck was dead. Backup alarm clock batteries, dead. Our wristwatch batteries, dead. We were sitting there in a dark truck, and he could not explain how he got out of the truck, out of his clothes, but that he could be mental. His wife was cheating on him, but the batteries were out of even his deeply knowledgeable hands. We were lucky that a few minutes after dawn some guys cruised by and gave us a ride to the closest phone. Yes, pre-cell phone days LOL. We told dispatch and they sent a wrecker and the whole 9 yards. They said it could be bad batteries or alternator, yada yada, so they replaced parts and off we went. We didn't tell anyone a word about all the other strange things that happened, and we kind of silently but mutually never spoke of it again. Hey Guido, my long ago friend. I kept that promise till now because enough time and distance have passed us by. I just always wondered what TF did happen that night and thought maybe someone would have some insight from something like this. Last summer I was taking a load from OKC to Dallas, Texas. I was traveling down I-35 and looking for a place to shut down for the night. It's like 3 a.m. and my clock was running down. Legally you can only drive 11 hours within a 14-hour clock once you start rolling. So, I can't be too fussy about parking, and finding an open spot in the dead of night can be a hassle. Especially around major cities. So, I pass the WinStar World Casino in Oklahoma and drive into Texas looking for a rest stop, truck stop, or anything really. Thankfully, I found a rest stop not too far into Texas. The truck parking lot was about half full, which I thought was odd, but hey, I wasn't complaining. Any parking spot is a good parking spot. So, I shut down for the night, do my post-trip inspection, and heat up some instant mac and cheese. Before getting some sleep I head over to the restroom. As I'm walking I notice a guy about 5 feet 8 inches and 150 pounds just standing next to a tree in the dark away from the lights. I'm like 5 feet 6 inches and 115 pounds on a good day. So normally I would have turned around and just locked myself in my truck, but I had to go to the toilet. So, I keep an eye on him as I head into the restroom. I find me a stall and do my business while keeping an ear out for our fellow at the tree. As I'm wiping up and getting ready to get out I hear the door open. There's 5 other stalls and this guy chooses the one to my left and sits down. My heart is pounding. He doesn't undo his pants or anything, just sits down and says hi through the stall. I quiet my breathing and focus every sense I got on this guy. Listening to his every shift and move. My eyes are glued to his shoes. And my heart is freaking out. I don't know if he wants some favor or to wear my skin, but I'm not feeling it. I reach for my pocket knife as quietly as I can and open that thing with utter care not to make a peep. And I wait. Must have been 5 minutes of just sitting there not making a single noise, just waiting, knife in hand. I didn't say a word, and neither did he. And so, he got up and left. I sat there another couple minutes waiting for him to come back. But he didn't. I get up and wash my hands and head out the door. My head is on a 360-degree swivel looking for this guy. I don't see him at the tree as I pass. I don't see him as I make my way to my truck. I don't even see a vehicle in the car parking lot. So, I get in and lock the doors like 10 times and keep my blade and flashlight right next to my bunk. I wake up in the afternoon without incident and without a second visit from bathroom stall guy. I still wonder what he wanted. I was driving down the streets, like 40 miles an hour, and out of nowhere there was a raccoon falling from the sky and it broke the window of the cab. I immediately stopped the truck and I tried to pet it, and it bit a piece of my pink and my ring finger. I got out of the cab as fast as I could and called 911. I told them everything I knew, and when they arrived, they took me to the hospital, and the wildlife, or something, removed the raccoon, and my hand is still damaged. And that destroyed the whole interior of my cab. Not a truck driver, but I have experienced one weird thing while driving to work. I was 18 at the time, so it was about a year ago when this happened. My brother, mother and I were driving to downtown Indianapolis and were merging to I-70 west from 465. When we took the exit, we saw this old wooden chair on the side of the road that had been knocked down. Didn't think much of it, but found it to be kind of weird. The thing is, I took that exact same exit to go to work, and the next day at around 5:15 a.m. I saw that the chair was standing up and it looked like some transparent white figure was crossing the road as I was approaching the chair. Needless to say, I was kind of spooked. On a midnight drive with two friends, and I turned, and I looked at my friends. I said with a frown, "You can roll me all down, cause somebody has just broke wind." Well, they did their best to deny and protest they hadn't started no breeze, but I said, just the same, I know I am not to blame, and yet somebody is cutting the cheese. Well, we argued a while through the midnight miles, and we stopped at a little cafe. An old server in jeans said, "Our specialty's beans." We said, "Take things away." Well, she must have overheard our joking words about the crime with no confession, cause when we looked up from our coffee cups, you should have seen her expression. Well, we made some tries to apologize if we'd said something that might offend. She said, "No dear, I hear a lot worse in here, but it sounds like you met our friend." And as she spoke, the whole cafe crowded around. Well, 10 years it's been since he walked in. Just remembering gives me a chill. Right over there he sat wearing a 10-gallon hat. His friends called him Big Bill. Well, he ate our beans till he busted his jeans. Then he waddled on out to the car, and from what I heard, and I believe every word, them boys didn't drive extremely far. Things got strange as the atmosphere changed. They all started gasping for breath with looks that would kill. They turned to Big Bill, said, "Bill, you're gassing us to death." But he wouldn't quit it, he wouldn't even admit it, and that got me incredibly paved. And when they got the next whiff, they were right by a cliff, and that's where they gave Big Bill the heave. Well, he never was found, but he might be around. We can't be sure where he went, cause drivers out there sometimes they swear that often they pick up his scent. So have another cup before you get up and say a little prayer to your maker, cause though it was unwanted tonight, you was haunted by the phantom windbreaker. Me and two other trucks were driving on North I-35 out of Laredo, Texas, just chatting on radio at 2:30 in the morning, and the lead guy came on the radio and said, "I think there's a dead guy on the road, jump over to left lane." But it was too late for the second guy to move, so he hit the body, and by the time the front tires, drive tires and trailer tires ran over the body, it was nothing but a pair of jeans, a shirt, and two tennis shoes with a piece of leg in one of the shoes. I stopped at the next rest area and called the state troopers. That was disturbing, and it was far away from anything. We didn't want to stop there because it would probably be traumatic. Or there may have been cartels doing something bad. Not a truck driver. But somewhat related. Several years back we were driving from San Francisco to Los Angeles around 3 a.m. No other cars or trucks around. We were having a conversation about the existence of God when I said loudly, "Okay, God. If you exist, show me a sign right now and I'll believe." At that exact moment, coming from the opposite side was a huge semi-truck. Full of lights, with a giant cross full of lights on the grill. It was perfectly timed. So, I was driving late at night in the desert when suddenly a girl in white came up from nowhere. Now you might be thinking fake, because this is a common story. But something about this felt real. I heard a tap in my window. I did not want to look, but I looked. Then I saw the most horrifying face. It was deformed. That's it. I thought. I pulled my pistol and aimed it at her. Then she said, "Chill bro, it's just a prank." Then I hear laughter. Before I went, I told my truck friends about my route, and they decided to prank me. My friend is like, "We got you good. Yes, I'm going to need therapy for years and have nightmares. But you got me good." Honestly, I wanted to fire my gun. I'm not a truck driver, but I was driving from Washington State to California it was probably 2 a.m. on the pitch black highway. I didn't have my high beams on since there was a car in front of me. As I was driving, I saw some red stuff on the ground, but I didn't have much time to react. The red stuff became big red lines in a second, and before I could think about it, I drove by a dead buck body that was torn apart at the stomach. It was pretty big and there were blood marks all over the road like it had been dragged. If I were one lane over, I would have hit it since it was so dark. I didn't see any bear or anything around it. Pretty freaky how fast it appeared. I could have easily hit it since it was so dark. Not a trucker, but mom taught grades 1 to 4 at a mission school in the mountains of Kentucky in the late 60s. We are talking about the reddest of rednecks here. Anyway, one evening she was giving a couple of students a ride home from a school function in the neighboring county. She was driving along a narrow mountain road when she came across 2 burning columns of tires, one on either side of the road. She was trying to figure out what to do because this was the only road home when someone behind her said, "Just gun it and go." So, she did, and after they were safely on the other side, she stopped and looked at the 2 kids in the back seat and asked which one she had to thank, but both of them said they never said anything. Not a truck driver, but I was taking a cross-country road trip with my girlfriend a couple of years ago. I pull into this gas station in Wyoming, and I remember there was this older man in the vestibule. He had these piercing blue eyes and gray hair. Rocked a mustache. He was a Harley rider too, but man, the way he was looking at me and smoking his cigarette just gave me total murder vibes. He was dressed in some old biker leather. Man, easily could have had a handgun and popped me. My GF got the strangest vibe too. I'll never forget that guy. Not a truck driver, but it happened in the middle of nowhere, and I just read the first part after typing this story. I once slept in an old Soviet tower. After 3 hours of sleep, a car parked next to it and left the motor running. I was on the top floor and the bike I rented was seen in a tree behind the parked car. First I thought it may be the police, who would have been okay to deal with, but no one came in and I couldn't run or bike away without going past them, and I decided to wait it out. I waited for at least 2 hours and the car still parked there, motor still running, and my phone died, so I couldn't send someone the location of the tower or something. I don't know the exact time, because my phone died, but after what felt like an eternity they left. Till today I don't know what happened tonight, and I didn't find any clues about it after that left. Anyways, after that I drove to the next town, checked into a hostel, and slept for the next 12 hours. It was in the dead of night at around 3 a.m. in 1997. I was driving across a vast and humongous forest to my friend's house, which was an 8-hour drive from my house, and there was nothing in sight except for the roads that seemed to go on forever and the seemingly infinite trees. Just then, I heard crying noises in the woods, which made me confused. After driving for about 10 more minutes, I saw a white figure standing still at the far corner of the road. As my truck approached closer, I could make out the figure as a woman wearing a white vintage wedding dress that looked from the 1950s, and I was confused as to why a woman would just stand there alone in the middle of nowhere at night. I then tried calling out to her by opening my car window, and at first she seemed to not even notice me at all, so I called to her even louder and was staring at her in a confused manner while my truck was passing by her. However, when I was just about to turn my head back to make sure that I was not drifting towards the trees, she turned her head towards my direction and stared at me, and then she started to bawl her eyes out, and when I turned back to the front view of my truck, I realized that I was so close to drifting off the road, and I quickly turned my truck. At this point I was still unsure about what was going on, but I managed to figure out that the crying was coming from this lady, and I was starting to get a little creeped out. I tried to forget about the weird experience by drinking my alcohol and just focused on driving the road. After driving for a few miles, I saw that same woman standing in the middle of the road, and I immediately braked my truck. Her eyes were puffy with the continuous tearing, and then she started to keep saying, "John, don't leave me, where are you?" Understandably being concerned and confused as heck, I stepped out of my truck and walked towards her while asking her if she was okay and whether if she wanted me to drive her to somewhere safer. Didn't say anything. Just kept crying and crying. At this point I was getting a bit past because she was holding me back a significant amount of time, and my friend had previously called me to come to his house more quickly because he wanted to show me his hunting collection in detail. I couldn't handle this anymore, so I just told that woman to go away, and surprisingly, she walked back into the woods while I got into my truck and continued to drive again. After a few minutes, I started to hear weird noises coming from the back of my truck. At first I tried to ignore those sounds, but it kept getting louder, so I couldn't just ignore it. I looked into my rearview mirror that clearly showed the back of my truck, but I couldn't see anything. I then continued to drive again, but I still kept hearing those noises. Unable to tolerate it anymore, I stopped my car and decided to walk to the back of my truck to see what was going on, and was wondering how weird the driver had been for the past few hours. Just then I saw something that scared me. Just to give you all some context, I'm a huge 6'5" man and had no real fear for my entire life at that point. It was that woman again, and I told her, "What is your problem and how have you been following me non-stop for the past few hours?" She only stared at me dead in the eye and started to laugh manically, and the tears in her eyes and her face suddenly changed to blood, and her previously pristine wedding dress became very beat up and torn with blood stains everywhere. She also had a huge stomach wound with exposed ribs, and she was missing one of her eyes. I screamed in horror as I dashed back to my truck and drove it at full speed without looking back. Just then, a truck driving from the opposite direction of mine appeared nowhere and crashed into my truck. The impact was so great that I flung myself out of my truck and lay on the floor severely bloodied and injured. I was then just about to lose consciousness when I saw the lady smile at me before vanishing, and then I fainted. I was then taken to the nearest hospital by a good Samaritan, and I was treated for a cracked skull, broken ribs, and legs. I know this sounds absolutely insane, but this experience has been haunting me till this day. I have told this story to countless of family members and friends, but all of them had refused to listen to my story and instead just claimed that I was too drunk that night, but I am telling the truth that I wasn't drunk that night, as I know very well when I'm drunk. I'm not asking you all to believe me, but this has had such an enormous impact on my life that I don't drive a truck anymore, and especially avoid places that are very secluded at night. Not really all that scary, but I was scared. I worked the early morning shift, started at 4 a.m., and as I'm on the way there my power steering goes out. I pulled over and called a family member to come pick me up. As I'm waiting in my cat, a shady person pulls up next to me, had my window rolled down, and asked if I had 50 cents. As I said no, he just drove off. It was unsettling, as I was thinking why someone would who has a car need 50 cents. Rolled up my windows and locked my car doors. I was out on the West Coast, trying to make $1 and things didn't work out. I was down on my luck, got tired of roaming and bumpkin around, so I started thumbing back east, toward my hometown. Made a lot of miles the first 2 days, and I figured I'd be home in a week if my luck held out this way, but the third night I got stranded, way out of town at a cold, lonely crossroads. Rain was pouring down. I was hungry and freezing, done caught a chill when the lights of a big semi topped the hill. Lord, I sure was glad to hear their air brakes come on, and I climbed in that cab, where I knew it'd be warm. At the wheel sit a big man, he weighed about 210. He stuck out his hand and said with a grin, "Big Joe's the name." I told him mine, and he said, "The name of my rig is Phantom 309. I asked him why he called his ring such a name. He said, "Son, this old Mac can put me all to shame. There is not a driver, or a rig, a running any line isn't seen nothing but taillights from Phantom 309. Well, we rode and talked for the better part of the night. When the lights of a truck stop came in sight, he said, "I'm sorry son, this is as far as you go, cause I got to make a turn, just on up the road." Well, he tossed me a dime as he pulled her in low and said, "Have yourself a cup on old Big Joe." When Joe and his ring roared out in the night and nothing's flat, he was clean out of sight. Well, I went inside and ordered me a cup. Told the waiter Big Joe was setting me up. You could have heard a pin drop. It got deathly quiet, and the waiter's face turned kind of white. Well, did I say something wrong? I said with a halfway grin. He said, nah, this happens every now and then. Every driver in here knows Big Joe, but son, let me tell you what happened about 10 years ago. At the crossroads tonight, where you flagged him down, there was a busload of kids, coming from town, and they were right in the middle. When Big Joe topped the hill, it could have been slaughter, but he turned his wheel. Well, Joe lost control, went into a skid and gave his life to save that bunch of kids, and there at that crossroads was the end of the line for Big Joe and Phantom 309. But every now and then, some hiker will come by and like you, Big Joe'll give me a ride here, have another cup and forget about the dime, keep it as a souvenir, from Big Joe and Phantom 309. Not a truck driver, but this story involves a truck driver. When I was in my 20s, I decided to head out across the country on a big adventure. I had a vague plan that eventually I would make it to California, but I ran into several detours and problems along the way. Eventually I just had to start hitchhiking because I had lost my wheels. One night on this lonely patch of road, I was finally able to flag down a truck for a ride. I felt lucky cause it was a pretty foggy night, and I didn't want to get stuck sleeping on the side of the road. I'd had some kind of rough times on the trip before this, so I was pretty relieved when I saw that the driver was an older lady that seemed pretty harmless. Well, we got going down the road a bit and things started to get kind of weird. She starts telling me a story about how 10 years prior on the same stretch of road there was a pretty nasty accident that resulted in fatalities. She was pretty graphic about it, and it pretty much creeped me out, so when I saw lights to a diner coming up, I told her to just drop me off there. As I'm climbing out of the truck, she tells me her name and says to let the people running the dinner know that she sent me. I figured maybe she drove that stretch of highway a lot and so stopped there often, and it might get me a discount or something. I walk into the place, the Wheeler Inn. I'll never forget that name. It's one of those places where everyone turns and looks at you cause you're not a local. Anyways, I say Large Marge sent me. The room is completely quiet, and everyone is just staring at me. This one guy speaks up and says that it is impossible. I was standing there all confused cause I'm sure that is what the lady said her name was, but maybe they knew her by a different name. Then this other guy speaks up and says that the accident 10 years ago from that very night involved Large Marge and she died in the fiery wreck. They even had a memorial up on the wall of the diner for her. Shook me to the core and still does to this day. I was out on the West Coast, trying to make $1 and things didn't work out. I was down on my luck, got tired of roaming and bumpkin around, so I started thumbing back east, toward my hometown. Made a lot of miles the first 2 days and I figured I'd be home in a week if my luck held out this way, but the third night I got stranded, way out of town at a cold, lonely crossroads. Rain was pouring down. I was hungry and freezing, done caught a chill when the lights of a big semi topped the hill. Lord, I sure was glad to hear their air brakes come on, and I climbed in that cab, where I knew it'd be warm. At the wheel sit a big man. He weighed about 210. He stuck out his hand and said with a grin, Big Joe's the name. I told him mine and he said, the name of my rig is Phantom 309. I asked him why he called his ring such a name. He said, son, this old Mac can put me all to shame. There is not a driver, or a rig, running any line isn't seen nothing but taillights from Phantom 309. Well, we rode and talked for the better part of the night. When the lights of a truck stop came in sight, he said, I'm sorry son, this is as far as you go cause I got to make a turn, just on up the road. Well, he tossed me a dime as he pulled her in low and said, have yourself a cup on old Big Joe. When Joe and his ring roared out in the night and nothing's flat, he was clean out of sight. Well, I went inside and ordered me a cup. Told the waiter Big Joe was setting me up. You could have heard a pin drop. It got deathly quiet, and the waiter's face turned kind of white. Well, did I say something wrong? I said with a halfway grin. He said, nah, this happens every now and then. Every driver in here knows Big Joe, but son, let me tell you what happened about 10 years ago. At the crossroads tonight, where you flagged him down, there was a busload of kids, coming from town, and they were right in the middle. When Big Joe topped the hill, it could have been slaughter, but he turned his wheel. Well, Joe lost control, went into a skid and gave his life to save that bunch of kids, and there at that crossroads was the end of the line for Big Joe and Phantom 309. But every now and then, some hiker will come by and like you, Big Joe'll give me a ride here, have another cup and forget about the dime, keep it as a souvenir, from Big Joe and Phantom 309. It's a great song. Look it up. I was driving an 18-wheeler flammable tanker in the middle of New Mexico, and these two brunettes started to pass me in a green convertible. They drove directly parallel to me, not passing, and signaled for me to pull over. We happened to be coming up on an abandoned service station, so I figured what, and swung around and got out of the cab. They stayed in their car but jumped up on the back of their seats and waved for me to come over. I cautiously start approaching on foot. When I was maybe 10 yards away, they start hollering at me, "Are you going to apologize? Didn't your mama ever teach you not to do things like that?" And I say, "What do you mean?" Then suddenly the one wearing a cowboy hat pulls a revolver she was packing in her belt and starts shooting towards my rig. She punctured 2 tires, then before you know it she hits the tanker, which explodes into a fireball directly next to the desolate highway. If that wasn't weird enough, they immediately start the car and start driving circles around me, then speed away, back down the highway. Before too long a sheriff's chopper showed up, and apparently after that pursued them with a dozen state troopers, ultimately cornering them on the edge of the Grand Canyon. Rather than be taken in for questioning, the two floored it and drove their T-Bird straight over the edge of the canyon. That was easily the scariest moment of my adult life, but at least I can say those two taught me an especially important lesson that day. Not particularly scary or long, but I was on my way to Ohio on the turnpike in Pa. I was coming around the corner at some time in the night when I saw a deer in the middle of the road that just got hit and was still alive. Who hit it? I never saw anyone on the side of the road, but it paralyzed the deer, I guess, waist down. It looked like it was trying to make it to the shoulder, so I wouldn't hit it. It just freaked me out 'cause it was still alive, dying in between the lanes. I wondered afterwards that I probably should have pulled it to the side of the road and killed it so it doesn't suffer, but I remembered I passed 2 other trucks not too long before that would probably do the job. I wish I had a better story. I just never really experienced some creepy. Not a truck driver, but I was out on the West Coast, trying to make $1 and things didn't work out. I was down on my luck, got tired of roaming and bumpkin around, so I started thumbing back east, toward my hometown. Made a lot of miles the first 2 days and I figured I'd be home in a week if my luck held out this way, but the third night I got stranded, way out of town at a cold, lonely crossroads. Rain was pouring down. I was hungry and freezing, done caught a chill when the lights of a big semi topped the hill. Lord, I sure was glad to hear their air brakes come on and I climbed in that cab, where I knew it'd be warm. At the wheel sit a big man, he weighed about 210. He stuck out his hand and said with a grin, "Big Joe's the name." I told him mine and he said, "The name of my rig is Phantom 309. I asked him why he called his ring such a name. He said, "Son, this old Mac can put me all to shame. There is not a driver, or a rig, running any line isn't seen nothing but taillights from Phantom 309. Well, we rode and talked for the better part of the night. When the lights of a truck stop came in sight he said, "I'm sorry son, this is as far as you go 'cause I got to make a turn, just on up the road." Well, he tossed me a dime as he pulled her in low and said, "Have yourself a cup on old Big Joe." When Joe and his ring roared out in the night and nothing's flat, he was clean out of sight. Well, I went inside and ordered me a cup. Told the waiter Big Joe was setting me up. You could have heard a pin drop. It got deathly quiet, and the waiter's face turned kind of white. "Well, did I say something wrong?" I said with a halfway grin. He said, "Nah, this happens every now and then. Every driver in here knows Big Joe, but son, let me tell you what happened about 10 years ago. At the crossroads tonight, where you flagged him down, there was a busload of kids, coming from town, and they were right in the middle. When Big Joe topped the hill it could have been slaughter, but he turned his wheel. Well, Joe lost control, went into a skid and gave his life to save that bunch of kids, and there at that crossroads, was the end of the line for Big Joe and Phantom 309. But every now and then, some hiker will come by and like you, Big G'll give me a ride here, have another cup and forget about the dime, keep it as a souvenir. From Big Joe and Phantom 309. My husband is a truck driver down here in the lowcountry of South Carolina. No overnight stuff, but he often crosses over into Georgia territory. This is not near as creepy as these other stories are, but I thought it was a little eerie. He was driving close to the Savannah River site, which is a nuclear reservation, I think around the Aiken area. It was a sunny day, early afternoon, and he was one of few vehicles on the road. I've driven that route a couple of times, but I'm not super familiar with it. It seems pretty remote in some places, and there's thick wood all around. He spotted a large dark animal emerge from one side of the woods and sprint across the road in front of him. There was no danger of him colliding with it, and he was able to get a decent, but quick look at it before it ran into the forest on the other side. He said it really did look like a large black cat, kind of like a jaguar. He said he'll never be sure and can't say with certainty it was a large apex predator cat, but it really looked like one from what he saw. Even though we're about 2 hours away from that neighborhood, I got really creeped out when he told me that. I have a fear of being the victim of a surprise apex predator attack. Like, I'm outside doing something, and I miss the breaking news that a tiger escaped from some exotic pet enclosure, or a rhino is rampaging down the rural road I live on for some reason. Ick. I know I'm nuts. Anyway, I was really spooked by that, huh?
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.